All right, we are live. Welcome back to the Kristen and Roman show. I'm Roman.
I'm Kristen Brown.
Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about trauma, a big word, right? The big T word, trauma. Just a quick intro. Trauma comes from the Greek word wound, like being wounded. And Kristen and I thought that we should really give this episode special attention because we hear it all the time, right? In society right now, traumatized, trauma, PTSD, people are triggered, and there's just a lot of that floating around. So we thought to do an episode on what is trauma and how can it be processed and healed, right?
Yeah. I feel like a lot of words get watered down and they lose their meaning because we learn basically from hearing a word and then we attach a meaning to it just based on the context that it was used in. So when we have these conversations, Roman, you and I, we really dive into what the meaning of something is. I feel like that's really helpful for people to really
Yeah,
understand. I do that oftentimes on any of my talks is I'll say, okay, my definition of this is this, just to get kind of create a grounding space to build from.
yeah. And what is your definition of trauma? The Kristen Brown definition.
My definition is basically what you just said. To me, it's really a clearer, smaller definition, which is anything that rocked your emotional world that left a wound. And sometimes, sometimes it can be big, capital T traumas, and sometimes it can be smaller, lower T traumas. Like it could just be things that are just reminding us of stuff that we may not have a huge emotional response to when the trigger, which we'll talk about, comes into our space. It must be just kind of like a whoo, like a smell can kind of remind you
Yeah,
of something, but you don't go into this panicky feeling or fight flight feeling or need to control feeling or breakdown feeling because of it. It just can kind of remind you of something for a second. But then there's things that can happen in our life that really is a reminder of it just touches that place inside of us and we're just bam, we're into this place. And that's the traumatic response. And I know that you can speak more to this, but because I'm very new to his work, but Bessel van der Kolk, didn't you say you had him on your podcast too? Yeah. Cool
I
dude.
did.
Very cool
Yeah,
dude. And
yeah.
he was talking about that back in the day, because he'd studied this for so long. He said back in the day that they were only talking about people who had gone to war and that this was a thing, but that it's way more expansive than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Because, when we break down what is war, as an impact on a human, as on a impact on the nervous system, right? All it is really a threat to your survival, right? It's a feeling of unsafety, like, oh shit, I'm about to die,
Yeah.
right? So if that stays with you, then any trigger in the future, like loud noises, similar scenarios, like you said, smells of gunpowder or smells of something that you were around when your life got threatened, will bring that back up. And so what we now know, thanks to people like Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate and all the people who are studying trauma really intensely, how it relates to addiction and mental disorders, including PTSD, what we now know is that it's really all about a specific nervous system and how it impacts it. So it doesn't have to be war, right? To you and I, or to a 6-year-old, uh, that impact could look very different than a soldier at war. At the same time, our nervous system can really be impacted in a similar way, so we feel threatened, and then the defense to it, the reaction, and how we move forward in life with this sort of red flag from our past, then creates these kind of triggers and the trauma recall, if you will, right? So it just depends what it is for any unique human. It's
Yeah.
different
Two
for
things
all
I
of
want
us,
to
right?
say to that. And one is that the brain records things that we were situations that we were unsafe in, whether emotionally or physically. The brain's going to record that in the amygdala, and then that's going to keep a lookout for things that are similar to it. So that's what this
Absolutely.
automatic response is that comes back that we can't control. I call it a knee-jerk response. It's just like when the doctor hits our knee with the
Yep. I just lost you there, Kristen. Are you still there? Looks like we're still live, but you're frozen. Hello, hello.
am I
Oh,
here?
there you are.
Okay. That was weird. It said you weren't able to connect, so reconnect. Are we good? Yeah, Roman and I were having a little bit of tech. Yes. Right. So
Hitting the knee.
it's the brain records that event that we are now calling trauma. The brain records that event and then it keeps a lookout in the environment for that same stimulus. And sometimes it is the exact stimulus, and sometimes it's something that just mimics it because that's the brain's job. That's our reptilian brain, is to keep us safe. So when that happens,
Yeah.
that's what the trigger is. That's when we're like, in that space.
Right. It's part of our operating system, right? It's the memory. If we didn't have memory, if we weren't remembering those things, you could say we wouldn't have PTSD or traumatic reliving of events and things like that. But we have that memory so that it can protect us in the future based on past information, right? It's almost like AI that's learning, oh, those kind of sounds or those kind of scenarios are going to be unsafe again for me. So I'm staying away from it. So it reminds us, oh, remember how that really fucking hurt? So don't do that again, right? So it's kind of like that. So that's a good thing as a mechanism. Um, I think where we get stuck is in never acknowledging, processing, and healing them, right? And you have a lot of clients you work with. You know what that's like when somebody just keeps going in circles and they're not willing to do the work to heal trauma. So perhaps we could talk about, you tell me, but we could talk about some of your experiences of how either yourself or clients where trauma was unhealed and it needed to be addressed, and maybe what the outcome was, you know?
Well, I feel like that's our job here because there's no person who's going to get out of this life unscathed. We all have something. We just do. And I remember thinking
Yeah.
back in the day when things were happening to me, I was like, why am I the only person that has, my brother died when I was 11 and blah 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 all these things. And then I started to look around, I'm like, but this person has that and this person has, like, everybody just had a little different flavor of it. And this is another nuance to this, is that what might be traumatizing to one person may not be to another. So let's say that there was two
Yep.
siblings and their house caught on fire. One sibling may just have all kinds of triggers when it comes to that experience, where the other sibling's like, it doesn't bother me at all. So there's
Yeah.
no order of hierarchy when it comes to trauma. There's just no order. And we need to remove any sort of shame or feelings that there's something wrong with us because we've been traumatized with something just because somebody else doesn't have that same thing.
Yeah, and good point, right? Trauma's on a spectrum, and just like the human spectrum, it's so multifaceted. So when we say even lowercase t, capital T trauma, right? Those are helpful terms, but they're really generalizing that
Yes.
something is smaller and something is bigger. But there's all this in between of like things that may not affect you, but affect me or affect my son. And so it's never fair to say, well, get over it. That shouldn't bother you, or that shouldn't be a big deal. Now, I agree that we're kind of overdoing it right now in society. I think everyone's traumatized, everyone's triggered, everyone's offended, you know. So it's unfortunate because there's really people who've been traumatized and their nervous system is trying to regulate, and we're throwing more gasoline into the fire by having everybody constantly talk about how this is bad and I'm triggered and we shouldn't do this and so should cancel this person and that I'm offended, right? It just creates more of this frenetic energy, but that's besides the point. But yeah, um, I would agree that uh, trauma. I always say just because there's no drama doesn't mean there's no trauma. You know, it can
I
be really
love that.
silent
Oh, it
slow,
can be
slow
very
cooking.
silent. Oh my gosh. And I appreciate greatly that there's trauma conversations now. I 100% am so glad that there is trauma conversations now. But like a lot of things that happen in society, and I think, I don't know if I mentioned this in this talk or if it was in our pre-gaming about this talk, but that things can get watered down. So everybody's like,
Yeah,
when people just have an emotion, they're calling it a trigger. And there's a
right,
really vast
right,
difference between an emotion, an emotional response to somebody's behavior or words, than an actual true trauma trigger. A trauma trigger is something that is autonomic. It happens. You cannot stop it. And there's a big feeling that comes with it, like you were talking about, a feeling of unsafety, a feeling of overwhelm, a feeling of fight or flight, a feeling of panic. The panic is the
yeah,
one that I have felt the most when I have had my my wounds touched, when the buttons were touched. I've That's the feeling. It's like, oh, like it's like, oh my God, kind of a feeling. Okay, that's
yeah,
very, very different than going, that person just pissed me off. That person just makes me mad. Who the hell do they think they are? It's a very different feeling than that. One is just an emotion that might be big, but the other one comes with a lot of constriction and a lot of kind of a feeling to it. So I
right.
think it's so important that we delineate what it is. But yet, that's when we've been triggered, because trauma, like you just said 3 minutes ago, can be silent, and it can be just the way it can be isolation. So there's a difference between getting triggered and just carrying around the trauma. So I think we should dive into
Right.
that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about, um, when we talk about anxiety, for example, right? It can be trauma triggered, or it can be a result of your trauma from your childhood, right? At the same time, just like we said last time, I think, or in the last episode or the one before, where we talk about your mess is your message, right? Like that trauma that you had in the past actually is an opportunity to overcome, to heal and process and overcome, and then live a better life. And I think where in society right now, a lot of people get stuck is, oh, I have this trauma. And so now I'm triggered and I have anxiety, and now I'm going to take a medication for it. And that's the end of that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's just
It's a
masking
band-aid.
the true cause. Yeah, it's a band-aid. So it all leads back to the same thing again, right? With trauma, if we don't actually process and heal it, then the only thing we can do is mask it, band-aid it, suppress it, tap it down, and then we have, depression, anxiety, mental disorders up the wazoo. And it's really everything's pointing to trauma as the bad guy. And the cool thing is, trauma is okay being the bad guy, because trauma is not an entity that's like here worries about its brand image and its look in the world, right? It's more like trauma's like, yeah, I'm here to fucking traumatize you so you can get over it. So if you want to blame me for the shit you're dealing with, blame me. Yes. And now what are you going to do about
And now what are
it?
you
Right.
going to do about it? Which is about taking responsibility, which you and I have done this, did a huge talk on. It was beautiful. It was amazing talk. And I invite anybody who's listening to this on the replay to check that out on either one of our channels, at ADHD is over or at Kristen Brown. You will find that episode because it's such an amazing episode. And that's the thing, is that things were done to us, things happen to us, and it's tragic. And there's a lot of, and I don't want to ever downplay or make it light, there's a lot of really horrific things that have happened to people where we have been victimized. But there comes a point in our life as an adult where we're no longer at the mercy of the elders and authorities around us or the systems, that we can actually take responsibility for our life and say, this is hurting me. And this is continuing to hurt my relationships, my careers, all these other things. And I want to take my freaking power back. So traumas aren't there forever and ever. They're just there until we start to heal them. And I will say this based on my experience and a little bit of research that I was doing, is that someone said that the trauma never goes away, but that you can become, it just can really, really, really diminish. So it doesn't impact your life. And I tend to agree with that, because I just had a trauma trigger like 10 minutes before we went live, which I'm going to share with you in a second. But it was very, very tiny. It didn't give me the feeling, but man, that thought came right back into my head. So I'll share that right now. Back in the day, it's going to be a quick story, but back in the day, I had a first cousin, and he and his siblings were staying at our house, and my dad and his dad were twins, and they all went out of town with the grandparents for somebody's anniversary or something. So everybody was staying at all the cousins were staying at our house. And I walked by the living room, and my oldest cousin, the oldest out of everybody, and I was quite young. I still had braces. I didn't have boobies yet. I mean, I was young. So I was about 14. And he walked by. He's like, Kristen, come here, come here. So I went in there and I said, what is it? And he goes, feel this. And he made me put my hand on his chest. And he goes, do you feel that? Do you feel my heart beating? And I said, I couldn't, but I said, no. And he said, well, it's for you. This was my first cousin. And I'm like, what? Now he's got a beard. He's a grown ass man. I'm 14 years old, braces, no boobies, the whole thing. I maybe had a first kiss in my life. And I was like, what the bleep? Anyway, fast forward, there's a little bit more to that. Nothing happened, thank God. But that was a weird thing for me. Well, I was just in my husband's office, and he's wearing a shirt that had 4 buttons. The top button was done and the bottom button was done, but these 2 were open. And I stuck my hand in there. I said, honey, you forgot 2 buttons. Your shirt's open. And he goes, it's for you. And I just pulled my hand. I was like, okay, you probably shouldn't say that to me. He goes, what? Like all innocent. Now I didn't have a big response, you guys. Wasn't like, it just reminded me. It was like that smell in the air, or that song you hear that makes you cringe. I just kind of cringed. And the poor guy, he's innocent because he doesn't know he just did that. He knows the story. And he goes, well, that's over. And I said, I know that's over. And I literally said this. I didn't have a huge response to it. But man, that did make me go, like, I'm 56. That happened when I was 14. But did I panic? Did I freak? Did I blow up on him? Did I fight flight? No. But it was still kind of there. So I do believe we
Yeah,
can get to the place where they're so manageable, but they may not ever completely go away.
that's a great example, and I think that's one where on the spectrum, for someone that could end up being
Yeah.
a small to medium, for someone that could be large, extra large, we don't know, right? But the awareness you did react, and how you have a choice now, like that pause and go, how do I react to it now? You're right. That's probably as far as we'll get in this lifetime. It'll never be erased, right? Unless you lose your memory. But it's always going to be part of our makeup, of your makeup, right? Like of your fabric, of Kristen. And I have similar things with me that trigger me. And it's not being stuck in that, like you said, that reaction where it's just how you react and you have no choice, right? It's that inserting a wedge and being able to pause and be aware of it. That's the work. That's the counseling, the therapy, the 12-step programs, right? That's where you wedge in and you go, okay, so I saw the trigger. Okay, so what do I do now? Like that's huge, right?
Yeah.
That pause.
That pause. And I will say that I have done the work on that, because we don't live in the same areas and all these things, but I rarely crossed his path over the years. After that incident, he kind of stayed gone for a long time. But at one point, when my father passed away, and of course his dad is my dad's twin, and they came to town, and we did a little, graveside thing and all these things. And I was like, ooh, I'm gonna have to see Michael. Well, I ended up sending him an email, and I would just said, don't talk to me, don't talk to my kids. That's something I'm not done with anymore. With, like, I don't want that in my life at all. Oh, no, where was I going with this? But I realized, wow, I'm still having a huge response to this. I'm still having a huge response to him, which means I am still tethered to this experience. Okay. And
Mhm.
so I said, I need to do my part to heal this, and which I did. And why I was to the point, like with that thing with my husband and his shirt, I had zero emotional response. It just reminded me. I just went, whoa. but I had zero, like, no, my heart rate didn't go up, nothing happened, like, didn't change my mood, but I had done the work, and I
Yeah.
think that's really important, and in this particular trauma, and this isn't the same for everybody, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm for this particular trauma for me, it was really forgiveness work. I really had to learn to forgive him so that I could move on with that and cut that tie for good so that I didn't stay tethered. So if I was in the same room with him again, there would not be that feeling that I had at my dad's funeral.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about doing the work, right, again, it's going to look differently for everybody involved, like whether it's therapy, 12-step, workshops, modalities, plant medicine, whatever, right? At the same time, I think there's two elements that you're pointing to, which is to accept is what happened and to take responsibility, not to be blamed for it, but to take responsibility, like letting them come from it through drugs, binge eating, sex, TV, whatever the addiction is, right? But to really be in the discomfort of those emotions, and over time, as we experience those emotions and we release them, then there's the healing, right? And then we get to what you're talking about, where you don't no longer have a strong emotional reaction. It's just a oh there it is, that thing. Huh, interesting. Okay. And that takes work, right? That could be a year, 5 years, 10 years. It's just going to take as long as it's going to take.
I think one of the most important things that you're saying here and really needs to be addressed in a really profound way is for people to not numb. You know, yes, sometimes people might require something because they're at a point of no return and they're like, I cannot get back without something. So they might have a little bit of an assistance in the meantime. But there's so many natural things that we can do to calm our nervous system. Meditation is one of them. Groundedness. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do to do that. But the first and foremost key always is to recognize that there's a problem. Recognize that this is showing up in an unhealthy and dysfunctional way in your life that is creating havoc in you and the way that you are able to experience and process and relationship all the things with life, and just having that recognition, wow, there's something that's embedded here that is healable. That's the most beautiful thing, it's healable. But if you're ignoring the emotions, if you're numbing the emotions, what happens is we are numbing the guidepost. We're numbing the little flag that says, "Here, heal me, heal me." Okay, so now we don't have that flag anymore
Yeah,
because we're drunk or we're over sexting or we're just buying things and we're suppressing and repressing. And you and I both know that those type of things are going to take root in the body and they're going to cause illness later. So
yeah,
to me, the first step is like, it's okay to feel an no one ever died from an emotion.
right.
Okay, let's think about that. No one has ever died from an emotion. It feels crappy for a minute, but if a person allows just that emotion in that moment to come through them, let's say they're angry, and they just like fully feel that anger and express that anger, it has been said by researchers that it takes 60 to 90 seconds for an emotion to completely move through. That's a minute and a half that you just have to be mad, hit a pillow, scream, do whatever you need to
Yeah,
do, not take it out on other people. But that, the density right there, you have an expressed energy that could be lying dormant and causing problems internally for us. So get the energy out and then just say, wow, I've got this anger that keeps
yeah,
coming up. Where is this anger stemming from? I'm working with someone right now who tends to pop off, just pop off any little thing that his partner says to him, he just pops off. And he's like, I don't know what this is. And I'm like, okay, there's a reason. So we've been digging into it and coming up with these reasons left and right of where this took root, what's being touched in this individual, and why that anger keeps coming forth because the anger was never expressed. So the anger is the indicator. I mean, and that's
absolutely.
awesome. That's what's awesome is
That
like, hey,
That's like you and I talked about this, right? If and I did this to a friend the other day. He said, "Oh, this person really triggered me," and I said, "Oh, did you thank him for it?" He's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, whenever you're triggered, you have an opportunity to look at something that might, get you to grow." And he's like, "Oh, what do you mean?" And so we went into it, right? But it's the same concept of this, what you were talking about, like, and I talk to a lot of parents with children with ADHD, and it's engine light, right? Talking about red flags. It's it's a check engine light, and what we were doing by giving them medication is we're putting a piece of duct tape over check engine light, hoping that if we can't see the light, then there's no problem here, right? But the
Yes.
light is really just saying you got to open the hood, and there's some shit that's not working, and then we got to heal that, right? Fix that. So I totally agree. Like these red flags or these triggers or these things that pop up are just showing us there's some unresolved trauma, there's an unhealed wound. And I think the way to, like you said, the way to heal it, first step is to acknowledge that the emotion's there, to sit in the discomfort of that emotion. And what's funny is like, I don't have to sit in the discomfort of joy. I don't have to sit in the discomfort of happiness or peace, right? But the sort of negative emotions, we do have to sit in the discomfort. But at the same time, it's just energy in motion, emotion, right? It's energy in motion. It's energy trying to move through us or out of the body so it's not stuck. And by suppressing it or by numbing it or by medicating it, we actually keep it stuck in the body. We're like, no, 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 no. I don't want you to move through me. Like, I'll just suppress it. And now we have, like you said, all the disorders and diseases. Uh, they're starting to now, Gabor Mate talks about this in his new book, The Myth of Normal, how most likely all of those disorders and diseases are called psychosomatic, right? It's
Yeah.
us people pleasing, it's us not wanting to feel, numbing, addiction, all the psychosomatic expressions of that is really what causes the dis-ease, disorder. It's out of order, right? It's out of ease. There's not much more magic to it other than, oh, unhealed trauma is asking to be healed, right?
There is research upon research upon research. And if you look into the work, anybody looks into the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, you are going to learn about this in ways that is undescribable, where people are literally healing their physical bodies in real time in what started out as 3-day workshops. And now he's turned them into 7-day workshops. And people are getting out of wheelchairs because they are doing the emotional healing work. It's absolutely mind blowing. It blows his own mind. Because I'm on a live
Yeah,
call with him every 3 weeks. I'm part of this group where I paid for a yearly subscription to be on a live call with him every 3 weeks, and to hear him, or I'm sorry, once a month, and to hear him, he's like, it's like it continually and blow. You can see it on his face. He's like, I'm continually blown away by this.
yeah,
But I want to dip back just briefly and talk about trauma in children, because I've had experience with this with my kids, and me not knowing anything about this back then and trying to figure out what the belief is going on here. I think it's so important that we shed some light on things. Our kids could be being traumatized, and not necessarily by you. It could be just other things that are in their environment. So because you're like, well, I've provided this loving home, they get hugs and kisses, doesn't mean these kids hasn't been traumatized somehow, some way. And I think it's important that we pay very close attention, because as they come up, when one of my kids started talking about this, they kept saying, I'm depressed, I'm this, I'm that. Well, it was of the age, middle school, where everybody's talking about these things. And I thought, I need to be on meds, is what this child was saying to me, meds. And I was like, okay, now they've got the language of the times. And I wasn't really paying that. I was paying attention, but I didn't realize until literally this child was like, I am extremely depressed, because their affect didn't look depressed. And I had to say, okay, let's dig into this. I don't want to miss something, because a lot of times people with even extreme anxiety or extreme trauma, their affect can be just they look normal. Like, we don't know what's going
yeah.
on inside of people. And I think it's so incredibly important to ask so many questions to your kids, So many questions.
Yeah.
And we have these internal truth detectors inside of us that are going to say, okay, that seems a little off, or that seems like this isn't right. But unless we're doing our own healing work, we might avoid it or teach them to push it down or to repress it the way we've done. So gosh darn it,
Yeah,
it's so important we pay attention.
totally. And you bring up a good point that I realized during my research, all this trauma and mental disorders, is that in the case of depression, we're taking an outer dialogue, right? Like something that we're maybe meant to say to a parent or to the world or to a teacher, and we're making it internal, meaning we're giving up. We're saying, there's no point to tell my parents, they're not going to listen. We
Right.
internalize it, you know? And a good example is my youngest son at some point seemed a little depressive during a couple of days, and he's usually a happy camper. And I said, "What's going on, buddy?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing." And as I kept asking questions, at some point he started crying and he said, "I'm just so stressed out about all this homework stuff." And so that was the outer dialogue that he could have had with his teacher, me, right, his mom. But there must have been some feeling of, I don't think they're going to understand, or I just want to be the good boy. I don't want to complain, right?
Yes.
That had him internalize it. Now, if you keep internalizing that and never talking about it, it becomes a reality of like, oh, stress, homework, oh, fuck. And next thing you know, oh, the kid has depression. We got to put him on meds, right? I just believe that like you said, asking questions, having dialogues around what kids are going through, and letting them know we're there for them, letting them know that we're going to try to do our darn best to not judge them or criticize them or get upset. You know, we're human, but we're going to just try to listen and be there for you. I think that solves like majority of young depression, young anxiety, young ADHD, and all of that is, to me, is all related to the co-regulating of the nervous system and just making them feel safe and having the conversations and reassuring them you're going to be fine. I'm here. That takes care of a lot.
Yeah. The feeling of I'm safe, the feeling of you're safe, I got you. It that takes care of a lot. I also wanted to mention to keep in mind that, we're talking about children here, and these are little people that don't have the language we have. Yeah, they're widow
Tiny
people.
people, little people.
And they don't have the language we have. So it may come out as, I don't like my teacher. It may not come out by my teacher bullies me, stresses me out, calls me out in front of class, slapped his hand hard on my desk. We don't know. It's going to come out in very, very simple terms, but it's up to us to investigate and to ask more questions. And let me tell you something. None of my kids ever once said, "Stop asking me questions, mom." Because number one, the question asking means I'm paying attention to you. I care about you. I want to know what's
Yep.
going on inside of you. And it feels good when people are asked questions because it is about them. And we can start to unravel some layers if like, we just asked one question. How are you okay? I'm fine. Okay.
Right.
That's it. We got to say, okay, well, you know what? You seem sad today. Or you just go sit next to them. I've done it before. I just sit next to a child, put my arm around their shoulder. Next thing you know, they're crying.
Right.
They're not
Exactly.
fine. Okay.
Right.
And so, yeah, we can start to like head this stuff off at the pass a little bit. And we're also providing the platform to them if something really bad happens. Like one of our mutual friends, I won't mention his name, but he was abused. I'm not sure if it was a priest or was a music director of his church. I think it might have been the music director of the church, but like, sexually abused by this person. And he didn't know that he could go anybody or tell anything. When he finally did, things were taken care of. But we want a place where we want to provide. I know I wanted to provide a place where my kids could come to me with things that might be embarrassing or shameful, by just
Yeah.
continually showing up and not judging and not judging and not judging and sitting in it with them, even though my head wanted to fix it or go beat someone's ass or do whatever I wanted to do. It just sat in there with their feelings. I think that really helps to start the unpackings rather than it getting all pushed down and ignored. But even still, because we're talking about trauma, even the best parents can't heal a child from some traumas. There's some things that are deeply rooted, they didn't come from
Right.
us, and, I'm thinking of some in my life right now that my children had, and that took some unpacking for them because they still have a brain, they still have an amygdala, they still it's still stored in them no matter how much I showed up for them, they needed to
Yeah.
do some work around it.
Well, that's the you and I talked about this. A, we can't trauma proof our kids, and B, we're
Yeah.
gonna unconsciously pass on some traumas from our parents that was passed to us to our children. They're gonna pass it to their children. But I think we're learning to reduce the amount of trauma, and we're learning to reduce the amount of unhealed trauma, or at least processed trauma, that we're passing on. Like with my kids, I know there's some things that I'm working on right now. They're not going to be as impactful as they were to me. That's continuously break myself up, and just to look at the patterns that don't work for me in life, right? So that I can find peace and serenity and calm and love and gratitude and all that. And that's it's the work. I mean, I always you've heard me say this before. There's no other work that's more meaningful than that work, because that work is on what I call me, the ultimately the magnet of manifestation. Like what I'm going to attract in life is based on how clear and clean I am as a human, back to love, right? And then everything else, work, busyness, money, all that stuff, it's going to show up to support that. And so I believe that there's no other work. People who are workaholics, who doing, are constantly at work, but they're neglecting their children, their relationship, they're neglecting their own well-being, mental health. They got a rude awakening coming, because the
Mhm.
world is we're about to go through a major transition, as we always do during election years. But I think this is going to be a really, really tough year in the next few to follow for a lot of people who kind of have the head in the sand, and have suppressed everything, and they're taking medication and they don't want to look at stuff. They're too busy. I got to go. It's all about money and Ivy League schools, right, for the kids. There's going to be a rude awakening. I'm predicting that
Yeah.
right now. You can mark my words.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's 2 things I wanna bring up. I wanna talk about when you're talking about handing down trauma, through the family pathology, and I just want to give a really, really simplified example of this just because it'll make people understand in a way, but it's not just about what I'm gonna say. This can be anything. It can just be passed down and passed down. I had a girlfriend who was deathly afraid of bees. Deathly afraid of bees. This one was like, 20 yards out. She's like, "Bee," and she would run. So guess what happened to her daughter, her firstborn? Same thing. She'd see a bee and she would run. Okay. So, and the daughter had not had any traumatic experiences with a bee, but my girlfriend had. So she was passing that down. This is a very, very simplified version of how we can pass things down through to our children. The other thing I wanted to talk about is I think we can really go into for people going, well, I'm not really sure where I'm traumatized. Like, I'm not really sure how can I know that it's actually a trauma response? How can I know that this is what's happening for me? And I wrote down that a trauma response, a trigger, is typically a really dramatic internal experience and sometimes external, the way we act to other people, due to something that's typically seamless or meaningless, like a little meaningless stimuli, but that person has a really big dramatic effect. And most of us have been around people who have done these type of things where we're just like doo doo doo, and we say something, and next thing you know, they're blowing up or acting in some type of way, and we're like, "What the heck just happened here?" If you notice that you're having these really dramatic responses to things, that's a little key, because if you notice that other people are not responding that way to the same stimulus, that's a key. But what the brain is going to tell you, what the ego is going to tell you, is that you're right and that person is wrong, and that that person needs to change their behavior so that you don't have this reaction. Never in a
Yeah.
million years is that going to fix anything. The reaction, that jump out of homeostasis into panic, is your key that something is deeply embedded that needs to be brought to the light for healing.
Yeah, exactly. That's like what I said earlier. If you can't pause in that moment, that shows that there has been no healing, right? The reaction is doing the action again, so subconsciously on autopilot that the moment somebody stops, if you ever see a person, let's say some guy at the bar goes up to another guy and he starts yelling at him. And if you see the other person just kind of pause for a second and take a deep breath or go, all right, buddy, I think you should go outside, whatever, that person has done the work, right? But the person that starts punching or yelling right back has not done the work.
Yeah,
Now, I want to make sure
it's
people
yeah.
understand if, yes, if you're being life threatened in the moment, you don't pause and, but most of the time it's not a life threatening scenario, but we react as if it was,
Hmm.
that reaction, that familiar reaction, the same action we've always done. Um, and so, yeah, it's really beautiful. Like I see in my own life, uh, right now, where I see this show up is with meeting women. I've talked about this before. For me, that's always been a how I used to meet women, my patterns, how I would objectify them, judge them, or lie to them, or take advantage of them, or cheat, or all that stuff I've done in the past. Now I get to pause and I get to go, okay, there's an attraction here. That doesn't mean anything yet. Let's pause. What's going on? And then they'll say something where I'm like, in the past, I would have been like, oh, fuck that, or like, whatever. I just pause and I go, oh, let's see, does that really bother me right now? Not really. Okay, continue. So these moments that's where freedom lies, where we get to be ourselves and set boundaries and state needs and be honest and pause and maybe say, I need some space. That's a whole new world for me. And that's due to trauma. Healing slow, but
Yes.
it's getting there.
It's and that's the coolest thing about all this. And this is what I started to notice when I first was really embarking on what I did not know what was my healing journey. I just knew that that wasn't working for me anymore and I was going to figure it out. But what I started to notice is that these subtle nuances in the way I was showing up to life. It was the way I was not reacting or responding instead of reacting, even if it was just internal, because I'm not someone that just goes and blows my shit all over people. Okay. But even if the inside I was doing, or just the tiniest things, and I was like, something is changing here. Something was changing because the old self was being replaced by what I call my healed self, my healthier self. It was slowly moving over here, and I was noticing myself just showing up differently in the world, and I was like, wow. So what I believe you're saying, Roman, is that ability to pause when somebody says something rather than you having a punch mechanism, a cut off, because people can do that. Like there's this one guy that I know. I'm not sure if I told this story to you or on this platform before, on this in our talks and our dialogues, but he had been hurt by a girlfriend when he was like 17. And he was just a really, really, really super, super lovely guy. But man, he was flying through girls like nothing. And he would never commit. And I didn't know him well at first because he was somebody's brother. And I was like, wow, what a douche. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Like, what's this guy? Just uses people, player, all these things, right? Then
Yeah,
one day at a function, I actually had a conversation with him, and I'm an energy reader. And the minute people talk, I feel their vibration. I mean, like the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, he's so lovely. He was the sweetest guy, and everything made sense to me. I'm like,
yeah,
he was annihilated at 17. He was annihilated by this girl. His walls went up. His amygdala was pointing out any little thing that some girl did. Even he had some girl spend the night and, amazing girl. They're like, oh, we really like his new girlfriend. I'm like, oh, what happened with her? Oh, he broke up with her. Why? She snored. Like he was trying to look for the ultimate perfection in
yeah,
order to
yeah.
feel safe.
That's you just described me minus the snoring situation, but I was really badly hurt at 17. A girlfriend cheated on me. I mean,
Wow.
I was so romantic. I made her furniture. I was in wood shop, right? I made her a
Wow.
clock. I wrote poetry. I was like in it, Roman, being romantic, right? I was like totally gone. And she was an alcoholic, traumatized past. She was promiscuous. She was very, I mean, drinking all the time, and
At
it
17?
traumatized me. Hmm.
Wow.
And I put up these walls, and from then on, it was just like I just slept with whoever I could sleep with. Didn't want to get involved emotionally. The
No
moment I
emotion.
did, because I'm a people pleaser. The moment I was in a relationship, I wanted out. I'm like, it was suffocated. I need out, and I would find a reason to get out and go to the next one. And so, yeah, I can relate to. And I think you bring up a good point that we've talked about this before in our society. We're so quick to label someone as a narcissist or as an asshole or cheater, and they're just traumatized people with unhealed wounds. They're like little kids who are still like unsafe and want to make sure they protect themselves, whether it's by taking stuff first, right? The narcissist, or the cheater who's like, I got to cheat first before they cheat on me, or I got to leave first before they leave me, right? Fear of abandonment.
Yes,
So all those things, they're just coping mechanisms. It's not like you are that way for life. This person is a narcissist and will never change. That's just bullshit.
it is.
That's not true.
And this is making me think of the big words in the world right now, which is anxious, avoidant attachment styles, and all these type of things. And what
Yeah,
it really boils down to, because that's kind of what you were, anxious, avoidant attachment style. And that's, like if you like be okay, I'm in, but now I'm out. It's like this push pull kind of situation. And that's what these attachment styles that people talk about, which by the way, I don't study these things because all I know is healed, unhealed. Like, what am I working on? What am I not?
yeah,
And what do I need to heal? And what do I need to not? Because it's going to show up in these ways that later become the labels that people say, like, oh, this person
exactly.
is anxious, avoidant. No, this person has been traumatized and is an unhealed person right now and needs to heal. So I've
Yes.
simplified life whether to in two different categories. Like if someone's really complaining about somebody, I'm like, yeah, they're really unhealed. That's like what I say these days, rather than they're this and that and the other thing because really it's like
And that's good. Yeah.
you've done your healing work or you haven't, or you're working towards it, or whatever. But I feel like it's work that we can't avoid in this life. Like this is required. This is required work to live an abundant, fulfilling life. Otherwise, we are going to put up these weird ass roadblocks. Do you remember those things back in the day, Roman? They were like a little wooden board with a maze on it, and you'd tilt it, and you had to move a, a marble
Ball.
through it. Yeah, do you
Yeah,
remember
yeah, yeah.
those?
Yeah.
That's how complicated and screwy Louie our lives can be without healing. We're trying to move this little ball and avoid the hole that drops the thing in it, but it's this
Yeah.
big ass maze. When we work on ourselves and heal ourselves, we raise our hand high and say, I've been wounded, I have been messed with, I have been effed up, cheated on, betrayed, abused. You own all that stuff. Finally, you're like, yeah, and I have the power to heal this, and I'm going to do just
Yeah.
that. And here's what I
Yeah.
found too, Roman. The healing work to me was not hard. It was not hard. If you're aiming the right directions, for me, it was just doing it. It was being honest. It was self-reflecting and wash, rinse, repeat. And pretty soon
Yeah.
things just started to disappear out of my life. And I just became a healthier version of myself.
And that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And I will say that, people who are wondering, well, so where do I start? It's so simple. Um, Life, or, the universe has set it up so beautifully and so intelligently, which is any time that we feel a discomfort or we're triggered, right? Or we call it, uh, I'm offended or triggered, or, anytime that happens in life, we have the opportunity to stop and go, okay, so I'm not feeling great right now. So let me not blame anything external, because I'm going to miss the opportunity to actually go and detective my way inside and figure out what about this interaction triggered me and where is that coming from and how can I work with that, right? Then you can have a therapist or a program or whatever, or a friend talk you through it. But most of us in life will react, right, like we talked about, and then blame the other person, the external circumstance, therefore completely avoid or deny the opportunity to go in and find out where it's coming from, where the gold is, and where the healing can bring out the gold, right? And that's it. I would just say, we just have to be aware of when we're triggered, own that, and then go to do the inner work, the detective work. That's all the work is.
It's fairly simple. It is about understanding what that trigger feels like. What's the difference between I'm having an emotion and what's the difference between a true trauma trigger? Because we can be triggered emotionally, that happens too. But what's the difference between a true trauma trigger and just an intense emotion? Just knowing that piece from the beginning is going to help. I also wanted
Yeah,
wanted to add that there's lots of modalities out there these days that work on trauma, and thank God, because it's become very widespread conversation
yeah,
these days about trauma. So there's a lot out there, so many resources and so many free resources for people. So there's really people, no reason why you can't get it done. It's not about money. It's not about the perfect therapist. It's about implementing tools and techniques into your life that is going to reset that foundation. And one of the things I believe it was Bessel van der Kolk that talked about, I think it was him that said this, but don't quote me because I don't remember those things. He was talking about yoga. I didn't know this. Yoga
yeah,
being really good for trauma healing. And I was like, ooh, do tell me more, Bessel. And what he said is it really gets you grounded in your body. Because
yeah,
oftentimes, as traumatized individuals, we are just like, we're out in the ethers. We're kind of like floating around, our brains all fuzzy, and we can't think straight, and we're overwhelmed, and we're depressed and exhausted, and like all these weird things. But yoga brings you back into your body. And I was like, that is brilliant. But also, it helps to slow the nervous system, to calm the nervous system. And this is the thing that worked the most for me, because when I was on the large chunk of my healing journey, I still consider myself on a healing journey. But that large chunk of that healing journey, I was meditating like a mofo. I'm talking 2 hours a day. I was doing walking
wow,
meditations, I was doing anything I could, because when I calmed my nervous system and I got myself into this beautiful homeostatic state, what happened is my responses started to slow naturally. They
yeah,
started to slow down naturally because I wasn't already heightened. Like you have a sunburn and then someone touches it and you're like, ah, okay. It's like if someone touches you without the sunburn, or the sunburn is like 3 days old now, not 1 day old, it's going to feel different. It's not going to be as shocking, as jarring. So to me, the number one thing, especially I deal with a lot of people who are dealing with what I call NTPs, narcissistic type people, because I don't want to just label everybody narcissists out there, or even just emotionally, um, not emotionally unintelligent. What's the word? Emotionally immature people. Really, we're dealing with that a lot. That can really get our nervous system heightened. And how do we heal from that? We can actually start to heal within the relationship by
yeah.
calming your nervous system, resetting your nervous system, and getting grounded, because that's the thing that's being activated. That's the thing.
Absolutely. I love that. By the way, I totally forgot to bring my charger into the studio, so I only have a few moments left, and I
I
gotta
think we're
sleep.
pretty good. I think we've covered it pretty
Oh,
well.
sorry
God
about that.
bless you, friend. I think we've
Yes,
pretty much nailed it, though, Roman. I'm
I think we're good. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot
Thank
here
you
for
so much for
people.
this lovely conversation, as always. I hope people will take something away from this. And I have no idea how to stop the live chat.
I think it's the X in the corner, but I just want to encourage everybody to like on either. You're probably going to see us on Roman's first, because he's the one who hosted the live today. And for some reason, when you go live together, it doesn't share on both platforms unless you go through some sort of app. But please share with someone that you think could benefit from this, because we're all here to spread love and healing and wisdom, and even your own wisdom is going to benefit somebody else as well. So share it with someone you love, like, subscribe, do all the groovy things. And we look forward to talking to you all in 2 weekos, 2 weeks. Roman and I get on
Those
bi-weekly.
weekos. Yes. And if we can do it, you can do it.
That's right.
So
Amen.
anything we talk about can be done by you.
Yes.
All right. Peace out.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.